Welcome to the Urban Legends Hotline, where we investigate the mysterious tales of your hometowns and stories passed through the old lockered halls of your schools to get to the haunted heart of the urban legends that you grew up hearing and maybe even telling. This week, we are covering the Jersey Devil. I'm your host, Chelsey Weber-Smith, and from one friend of a friend to another, this is American Hysteria.
My name is Brandon, and I grew up in New Jersey at the edges of the Pine Barrens. And growing up, I was a Boy Scout. We went camping a lot. They would tell us scary stories around the campfire. And the one that I heard was the story of the Jersey Devil. So legend has it that back in 1735, there was a family who was one of the first settlers of New Jersey as a colony. Her name was Mary Leeds. She was also known as Mother Leeds because she had 12 children. She got pregnant again. She didn't want the child. And when she was in labor, she cried out to the heavens. She raised her fist and she cried out, "Let this one be a devil." And at first, everything seemed normal. It was just a normal baby. But then within minutes, the baby transformed and grew large, black, bat-like wings and grew long, black talons. Its feet turned into hooves, and its snout grew long. It grew horns, and it also grew a tail. Some say it had a devil tail. Others say it had a serpent-like tail. It flew up the chimney, let out a blood-curdling scream before it flew off into the night. It's one of my favorites, and I would love for you guys to cover it. Thank you so much.
Our dear listener, Brandon, summed up well the backstory of this centuries-long tale of the Jersey Devil, a creature whose breath was said to sour milk and kill full rivers of fish, who was said to cause crop failures and droughts, to mutilate cattle, dogs, ducks, and whole coopfuls of chickens, and even, once in a while, attack a human being. Over the last 200 years, eyewitnesses have described the monster in strikingly different ways. In addition to the large bat-like wings, cloven hooves, and serpentine tail, it is said to have the body of anything from a deer to a kangaroo, the head of a horse or a goat, and little clawed arms, kind of like those of a T-Rex. At this point, the Jersey Devil has grown, like most cryptids, into a massively marketable property, another kind of celebrity beast whose image and name now grace tourist t-shirts, hats, mugs, magnets, bumper stickers, beer labels, and cocktails. You can find the crews of paranormal shows with shaky cameras stomping into the massive, dense forest known as the Pine Barrens, their footage interspersed with alleged eyewitness accounts.
A body that's similar to a horse or a deer.
It was just really ugly, and it was a snout, but it wasn't a snout of anything I've seen.
The head of a horse, the wings of a bat, the feet of a goat, and a long serpentine tail.
It was like grotesque, very dark, round eyes.
Eyewitness descriptions of the Jersey Devil vary. From a winged half-bird...
Along with the innumerable indie devil hunters posting videos on YouTube, there are 3 major organized groups that are committed to finding evidence of its existence using night vision goggles and trail cams.
I proceeded with my plan, which was to transfer the goat's blood into an empty water bottle and then use the bottle to spray the blood on a twig, which I figured may coax the Jersey Devil into coming out of hiding.
Put it on top of the branch sticking out. Yeah, that's it, right there. Yeah, that's good. He's going to perch on that thing.
In 1982, the state held a voting contest to decide the name of their hockey team, with the New Jersey Devils winning out easily.
The New Jersey Devils are the 2003 Stanley Cup champions.
In 1993, the Jersey Devil had the honor of becoming one of the very first X-Files Monsters of the Week, launching it to an even greater level of national fame.
An X-File?
Ever hear of something called the Jersey Devil?
Yeah. It's a beast that's supposed to come out of the woods and attack cars, right? Kind of like an East Coast Bigfoot.
Back in 1938, the devil was even given the unique title of Official State Demon of New Jersey, and the governor was quoted as saying,
"When I was a boy, we were never threatened with the bogeyman. We were threatened with the Jersey Devil, morning, noon, and night."
Personally, I've never really been interested in cryptids, and I wasn't planning on doing this episode. That is, until I learned the true backstory of the Jersey Devil, known as the Leeds Devil up until the early 20th century. It turns out that this semi-goofy, mishmashed, bloodthirsty boogeyman is actually much more than itself. Its history rooted in dramatic and petty early American political religious rivalries and elaborate circus sideshow-esque flim-flam that melded together to birth a legendary monster still famous to this day. And all that, dear listeners, interests me, very much. In the winter of 1908 and early 1909, rumors began spreading of mysterious hoof-like footprints found dotting the snow in various parts of the New Jersey Pine Barrens, and locals soon began connecting them to earlier tales of what they called the Leeds Devil. Photos of the tracks were printed in newspapers across New Jersey as well as in surrounding states. And then, wouldn't you know it, more people started seeing and reporting more prints of various sizes and shapes in their yards, on their roofs, and across their hunting trails. A local man named Norman Jeffries saw the articles and had heard the tales of the Leeds Devil that old-timers had been telling for upwards of 100 years. Realizing he had a golden opportunity, he went straight to his boss, Charles Bradenberg, and their business manager, T.F. Hopkins, with a newspaper clutched in his fist. Together they read the articles in the office of the 9th and Arch Street Dime Museum, one of many such lowbrow attractions of the time, aimed at working and middle-class Americans. Far more like a circus sideshow than an institution of higher learning, the 9th and Arch Street Dime Museum boasted a proto-penny arcade on its first floor, animal acts on its second, and members of freak shows and displays of human anomalies on its third. Like many of the other dime museums that were beginning to fade in the early 1900s, 9th and Arch Street was struggling financially. But now, Norman Jeffries was armed with a very ambitious PR plan up his sleeve. Step 1, plant more sensational stories about the Leeds Devil in New Jersey newspapers to blow up the excitement even more. Over the next 6 days, there were a flurry of reports about the creature, some fabricated, some seemingly genuine, and it's difficult now to totally parse out which is which. The papers wrote about groups of men and boys following the tracks with their guns, occasionally shooting at random into the Pine Barrens. Then there were reports of dogs and livestock ripped apart. Hounds were said to have bristled and ran in terror when their owners tried to get them to follow the footprints. Then the eyewitness reports began. Some described the devil as a horse or deer with wings. Some said it walked on 2 legs. Others said it had horns and a serpentine tail. A fisherman claimed he had to fight off a large winged creature with an oar. After all was said and done, more than 100 people told the papers that they had seen their own version of the monster, allegedly. In response to the upset, 100 farmers set steel traps to catch the predator, and reports said that their sons were waiting nearby with rifles. Schools and factories closed. There were reports of a fire department trying to shoot it down with fire hoses. The press said that 2 professors went out into the woods with nets, divining rods, catnip, halters, and birdline. One man claimed he was bitten before watching the devil drink water with its ears. Some reporters didn't know what to call it, and aside from the Leeds Devil and then the Jersey Devil, there was the Flying Death, the What Is It, the Jabberwock, the Mystery from Mars, and the Flying Hoss. An alleged expert from the Smithsonian told the papers that it may be some kind of pterodactyl that had been considered extinct for at least 70 million years, and confirmed his belief that such prehistoric animals could still be alive, hidden deep in caves or dense woods. In one article, toward the end of the week, my fellow Boro-Snoro skeptic had a point to make.
When one stops to think, how absurd is the latest Jersey sensation about the Leeds Devil, which has been given so much space in the newspapers of the entire country, it but goes to show the superstitious spirit of the people, even though we live in an enlightened age and are supposed to have passed beyond that stage of primeval belief in spirits, devils, ghosts, and the like. Atlantic City, up to last night, had escaped a visit of the alleged devil, which may have really been a cat or dog crossing snow paths up the state, and these paths magnified into devil's hooves.
It's difficult to know how widespread, how truly panicked this alleged mass panic actually was, if there was a real sense of communal dread, or if this was more a jaunty bit of communal amusement lost on more serious types. I suspect it's somewhere in the middle. The end of the allegedly frenzied week of sightings and reports, the folks at the Arch and 9th Street Dime Museum ran one more planted story that went like this.
J.F. Hope, an animal trainer, issued a statement this afternoon saying that the strange bird beast is, quote, an Australian vampire devil, which escaped from him 10 days ago. There is only one like it in captivity, and that is in Berlin. It can swim as well as fly. Scientists are puzzled to give a name to the beast, which is a combination of bat, kangaroo, and pony.
Ready to consume the fruits of its bullshit, the museum got in touch with a nearby taxidermist who contacted a nearby animal trainer who sent over a cage containing the live animal they decided could best pass as the composite cryptid. It was a kangaroo that the men painted with green stripes, affixing makeshift rabbit fur wings to its back. Next, they offered cash to a clown from the Ringling Brothers Circus to gather his clown friends and pose as official animal handlers on the hunt for the Leeds Devil. The Dime Museum equipped them with uniforms and weapons and nets, and then loosed them into the woods to chase after the mythical beast. Keeping the curious at bay with the use of a wide fence, the clowns turned animal handlers put on a show of it, shooting guns and crying out in fear, an unidentified screeching noise frightening the crowd, while one of the clowns climbed up a tree so he could be seen dropping a net down on the shadowed kangaroo. When the hunting group finally emerged, seemingly shaken up, they pulled a cart behind them that carried a cage covered by a blanket. They made their way back into town with a parade of people in their wake, while the hidden kangaroo screeched and rattled around powerfully. And where do we think this procession was heading? Right back to the old 9th and Arch Street Dime Museum, of course. Their plan had worked. The public was desperate to see the Leeds Devil, and the next day, thousands would arrive at the museum's doorstep to get a look at whatever it was that had been tormenting their state. An advertisement printed in regional papers blared.
Caught and here, alive! The Leeds Devil, captured Friday after a terrific struggle. Swims, flies, gallops. Exhibited securely chained in a massive steel cage. A living dragon, more famous than the fabled monsters of mythology. Don't miss the sight of a lifetime. 10 cents admits all.
But the nightmare for our dear kangaroo was only beginning. He was taken down into the basement of the museum and put into a large steel enclosure that was kept purposefully dim to help disguise the truth of what patrons were looking at. And the hucksters scattered gnawed bones across the floor for maximum effect. Of course, our dear kangaroo was not a willing participant in the spectacle, and so Norman Jeffries hired a boy to hide in the shadows of the enclosure and use a long stick topped with a nail at the end to poke at the animal. In order to make sure the charade was not found out, the Leeds Devil show offered only a passing glance at the creature. The curtain that lined the cage would rise, and the boy would poke our dear kangaroo, causing it to jump forward in the dim light, its janky wings shaking. Then the devil would let out a pained screech, and the curtain would fall back down immediately before the audience could understand what they were really seeing. The same micro show would happen many, many times a day as the long line shuffled in and out of the room. The publicity boom would last for several weeks until people started to realize that the Jersey Devil was actually an abused kangaroo. And so the boys of the 9th and Arch washed him of his stripes, slid his wings off his back, and returned our dear kangaroo to the New York trainer from whence he came, and he lived happily ever after, is what I'm going to tell you. The 9th and Arch Street Dye Museum, buoyed only temporarily by the frenzy, closed soon after. But it would be 20 years before Norman Jeffries would officially admit that the whole thing had been a publicity hoax. And yet, for decades after and into this current day, people continue to describe a kangaroo-like creature when encountering what they claim to be the Jersey Devil, as it became known after the state's 1909 hysteria. After the excitement subsided, the Jersey Devil satire began. Reports continued into February, growing more and more ridiculous.
There was a strange noise in the yard. It sounded like a small horse dancing. I went to the window and looked out. There it was on the shed roof, dancing. It was about 3.5 feet high, with a head like a collie and a face like a horse. It had a neck like a turkey and wings 2 feet long. Its hind legs were like a stork's, but it had feet like hooves. When I looked closer, I saw 2 short front feet like a dachshund's paws. But it walked on its back feet and flipped the paws.
Another man allegedly claimed to see a beast bird 18 feet high that said to him in English,
"Where do you keep the garbage can?"
He said that he had tried to run, but the creature caught him and wrapped its red, sinewy neck around him, so he grabbed his hatchet and began to chop at the thing. He hit it in the head and its right eye fell out, which looked like a newfangled lamp, which then swelled like a balloon and took off into the sky. Another witness to the Jersey Devil told a reporter that he saw an animal with a body like a mouse, a head like an elephant, a tail like a crocodile, golden wings the size of a canary's, with 3 toothpicks for legs, smoking a cigarette. Despite the cryptid being lifted into the realm of the ridiculous, the Jersey Devil wasn't dead yet, and waves of sightings, much smaller than 1909's, would continue through the 20th century. In 1957, a forest fire in the Pine Barrens led to reports that an unidentified animal corpse had been uncovered in the ashes. Though I can't find any copies, the papers allegedly ran photos of the creature with headlines like,
"Skeleton baffles experts. Is Jersey's devil dead? Jersey Devil may have met his end."
The news reports were printed on Halloween, so it seems safe to say that this might have been another lark from the media, one that led to so many curious folks flooding the area that the Greenwich Township Police had to post signs that said, "The Jersey Devil is a hoax." More after this. And now, back to the show. 200 years before the Jersey Devil's honorary diploma as a commercialized attraction, the thing then known as the Leeds Devil was a catch-all cryptid for the calamities that befell the residents of the Jersey area. In 1887, after a resident spotted a creature near the Pine Barrens, he went on to speak to a reporter, summarizing the stories that had been passed down by those who lived in the woods.
Just after the Revolutionary War, a young man named Leeds, who had lived in Evesham and was well known in all that part of the country, married a respectable but harum-scarum girl, who was the life of all the corn huskings, paring bees, dances, and rustic merrymakings. She had a temper of her own, as the stories go, and after marriage refused to settle down to domesticity, but insisted on joining in all the gay doings of the region as she had done as a girl, in spite of her husband's protests. When she found she was to be a mother, she became absolutely wicked in her complaints and regrets over having married, and led her husband a terrible life. The night before she became a mother, she was particularly violent.
The story continued in the usual fashion, a monster child blasting out of a bad mother's womb and then blasting out of a chimney to disappear into the woods and terrorize people for all time. As is particularly noteworthy in the telling you just heard, the mythical Mother Leeds seems to take front and center in the tale of the Jersey Devil. In fact, she is the cause of the whole nightmare, the bloodthirsty creature itself simply an unfortunate byproduct of her feminine insolence. Though there is no evidence that a Mother Leeds fitting this description ever existed, there was a radical religious activist named Anne Hutchinson, who more closely fit the description preserved in the folktale, and whose life may have played an early role in the myth's creation. In the 1630s and 40s, she was railing against the Puritan elites in the Northeast, claiming that their doctrine of the covenant of works was insufficient to get Christians into heaven, instead promoting the idea of free grace, encouraging a personal relationship to God. Powerful Puritans of the time did not like this sentiment because it took away their power positions as intercessors, the ones who could talk to God on behalf of the populace. As she gained more and more followers, her feminine zeal pissed off the religious government, and Governor John Winthrop made it his personal mission to dispose of the troublesome broad. He accused her of leading a community of women into
abominable wickedness,
and maligned her as an
instrument of Satan
and an
American Jezebel.
As rumors about Anne Hutchinson spread from the preachers to the commoners, many started to believe she was a straight-up witch. But luckily, this was a few decades before the trials in Salem, which may have seen her hanged for her alleged crimes. Nonetheless, she was tried in a Puritan court for slandering the ministers in a very public trial of the century. She was, unsurprisingly, not allowed a defense counsel, and after a few days of dramatic accusations and really annoying masculine moralizing, a guilty verdict was handed down and Anne Hutchinson was officially banished from the township. But as she started to leave, a young follower of hers named Mary Dyer stood up and took Anne's hand, walking beside her toward the front door of the courtroom. And then, suddenly, a voice from somewhere in the tittering crowd cried out, "Mary Dyer was the mother of a monster!" John Winthrop, frothing at the mouth for more reason to demonize Anne and her followers, said something like,
"What doth thou meaneth?"
And that's right when two-faced bitch minister John Cotton entered the chat, flapping open his ugly mug, a man who had actually once been an ally to Anne's cause. But his fondness for her had dissipated as she became more and more of a shrill feminist, a woman preaching to both men and women, presuming she knew more than the male religious leaders, including him. And so, right there in the court, he betrayed her brutally, detailing to the authorities a scandalous birth Anne Hutchinson had attended as a midwife, that of the young supporter who had just taken her hand, Mary Dyer. Along with another local midwife who just so happened to stand accused of consorting with the devil, Anne attempted to deliver Mary's premature infant, who was born with visible congenital disabilities and did not survive. The body was buried by then-ally Minister John Cotton, and the four vowed to secrecy to spare Mary and their religious group any potential condemnation. That's because, at the time, monstrous births, as fetuses or infants with visible congenital disabilities were so charmingly known, were seen as punishments from God for the sins of the mother, and Mary's story could have been easily manipulated by their religious enemies. And they were right. At news of this secret birth given in the court, Governor Winthrop seized on the story, hoping to further punish Anne Hutchinson and the women who followed her example, ordering the body of the so-called monster exhumed. It had been 5 or 6 months since the burial, and according to the writings of Winthrop, more than 100 persons watched them dig up, quote, "a most hideous creature, a woman, a fish, a bird, and a beast, all woven together." In a book later published by Winthrop, he described Mary's stillborn infant in detail, with no exaggeration, I'm sure. Quote, "It was of ordinary bigness. It had a face but no head, and the ears stood upon the shoulders and were like an ape's. It had no forehead, but over the eyes 4 horns, hard and sharp. All over the breast and back full of sharp prickles and scales like a thornback. Between the shoulders it had 2 mouths, and in each of them a piece of red flesh sticking out. It had arms and legs as other children, but instead of toes, it had on each foot 3 claws, like a young fowl with sharp talons." After her banishment, Anne became pregnant with her 16th child at the age of 45, but suffered a miscarriage and produced a mass of undeveloped tissue. Rumors of this new monstrous birth, produced by his great enemy, eventually reached Governor Winthrop, who then got in touch with the attending doctor and heard in sordid detail all about the form of the fetus. The description of the birth was also included in his book, linking it to Mary's in no uncertain terms. Quote, Then God, as clearly as if he had pointed with his finger, caused the two fomenting women in the time of the height of the opinions to produce out of their wombs, as before they had out of their brains, such monstrous births as no chronicle hardly ever recorded the like. In a way, this was nothing new. True crime tales of monstrous births, both human and animal, were hot entertainment for early American colonizers. Pamphlets and broadsides were bought with morbid glee that featured freaky woodcut images and alleged real accounts of women giving birth to serpent babies, winged babies, animal babies, or half-animal, half-human babies. The morality tales that accompanied such births were of sinful women faced with divine punishment for their actions while pregnant. These images and stories were also used in these broadsides and pamphlets to malign political and religious rivals in sensational ways, and obviously the treatment of Mary Dyer and Anne Hutchinson fits this bill perfectly. Mary Dyer was later executed by the Puritans for her conversion to Quakerism, among other supposed transgressions, and only a few decades later, during the Salem witch trials, tales of these monstrous births became stories invoked by the prosecution, further cementing into the popular culture the idea of fetal monsters. Monsters much like the Jersey Devil, or, as it was known for many years, the Leeds Devil, its name taken from yet another vocal religious radical. More after this. And now, back to the show. A few decades after that sensational trial in the early 1700s, the Quaker religion, a relatively liberal sect of Protestantism, became a strong and powerful presence in the New Jersey area. As told in the main text used for this episode, The Secret History of the Jersey Devil by Brian Regal and Frank J. Esposito, a writer named Daniel Leeds lived in the Quaker stronghold of Burlington, and though he was devout and dedicated to his religion and community, he also thought beyond the boundaries of the church, becoming interested in esoteric and mystical concepts. He was a man full of big ideas that he truly believed in, ones that he genuinely wanted to share with his community, believing that it would improve their spiritual lives. So he started his own almanac, a hot new trend for wicked smart guys, or guys that thought they were wicked smart, in which they personalized and put out little annual books using the recently popularized invention of the printing press. Like most others of the time, the Leeds Almanac provided a calendar, predicted the weather, and listed the tide tables. But to put his own spin on the thing, Daniel Leeds added in some of his unorthodox passion: astrology. The practice had become somewhat accepted as a precursor to astronomy, a way to travel on land or water by the study of the stars, or to provide information about sunrise and sunsets and phases of the moon for farmers and fishermen. But the Leeds Almanac went beyond practical calculations. Daniel connected the stars and planets to different body parts, to different kinds of medicine, and to the various aspects of God himself. The Quakers, liberal as they may have been, still considered astrology to be the work of devils, and they expressed their outrage that the Leeds Almanac was veering dangerously close to paganism, ordering all copies destroyed. As was required in their doctrine, Daniel Leeds was then called upon to publicly apologize to his elders and community at large because he had
bringeth scandal upon ye truth.
He stood up at the following Quaker meeting, head hung low, offering an apology for his offense because he felt like he had no other choice. But Daniel Leeds wasn't sorry. That was far from the end of the spiritual seeking and controversial publishing of this dangerous town eccentric. After much studying and soul-searching, he published a Christian occultic New Agey mystical tome of theological science called The Temple of Wisdom. It contained notes on everything from natural magic to angels to the behavior of devils, and of course, more astrology. This was a massive undertaking for Daniel Leeds, and he held out hope that this time his community would get it. They would understand and celebrate his work and his powerful mind. Instead, the elders would go on to destroy almost every copy of the Temple of Wisdom to prevent it, as they said, from corrupting others and challenging their divine authority. That's when something snapped in Daniel Leeds, and no longer being willing to take their Quaker shit, he became an aggressive local contrarian, preoccupied with intellectual revenge against those elders who had wholeheartedly rejected not only his work, but his very soul. And so he absolutely popped off, writing anti-Quaker diatribes, skewering the leaders and their religious philosophy in a barrage of pamphlets, short works of literature that could be written, printed, and dispersed very quickly. The Quakers, being a more radical sect of Christianity, were used to being harangued in these pamphlets and were just as used to throwing out their own defenses and retaliations. Different Quaker intellectuals attacked Leeds in their own pamphlets, and Leeds shot back with increasingly scathing takedowns. There were many more back and forths about who was taking what out of context, who was misquoting, who was manipulating texts, and generally who sucked the most in what basically amounted to a slow-motion social media war. Daniel Leeds expressed a common sentiment that many of us share today when he admitted remorse about being a part of
a scribbling, contentious age,
but reasoned that
I find it my duty to detect falsehoods and slanders.
Eventually, this publishing battle led to a pamphlet written by a Quaker named Caleb Pusey that he called
Satan's Harbinger Encountered, being something by way of answer to Daniel Leeds.
The author accused Daniel Leeds of being capital E evil, of being a murderer, and, as claimed in the very title, Satan's harbinger. Soon, local Quakers all over town, those that used to be his community, started accusing him of being a devil. Throughout all the drama, Daniel Leeds' third wife was giving birth to no less than 9 children over the course of their marriage, a large number even for the time, so it's possible that this fact may have played a part in the creation of the Mother Leeds character. After his retirement in 1716, Daniel Leeds' son Titan took over the almanac, but left behind his father's penchant for high drama and venomous discourse. Still, the shadow cast over him by his devilish daddy made him a target for the gossipy Benjamin Franklin, who thought if he could take down the Leeds Almanac, he'd be able to sell more copies of his own, Poor Richard's Almanac. Franklin enjoyed making fun of Titan as well as the astrology his father so loved, and he printed a satirical article that claimed the planets and stars foretold the coming death of Titan that very October. This enraged the young man, who then printed his own article, calling Benjamin Franklin a fool and a liar. Unsurprisingly, Titan's tizzy only delighted Franklin, who continued to poke fun at his outrage, and in October announced in his almanac that his rival had died just as predicted. Franklin wrote that the ghost of Titan Leeds was haunting him, and that any new Leeds almanacs were being printed from beyond the grave. Ben Franklin also used that famous wit to accuse Titan of being in league with the devil himself, knowing full well that the general superstitious population would not understand the subtle layers of his satirical accusation and would take the satanic connection literally. According to folklore, including the telling by our dear listener, the so-called birth of the Leeds Devil occurred in the 1730s, right when the Leeds men were publicly called devils by one of the most famous men to ever live. In addition to all of this, Titan had also made a potentially fateful decision to alter the masthead on the Leeds almanac, prominently displaying, instead of just the Leeds name, the Leeds family crest. And what did this crest contain? A dragon-esque creature with bat-like wings, a pointed tail, and clawed feet that looked not unlike later descriptions of our Jersey Devil. When not slow trolling his almanac competitors, Benjamin Franklin wrote of his belief that strange monsters lurked in the unexplored areas of the country. This had been a common sentiment since the arrival of the British colonizers. They had no idea what new beasts and potential magical creatures they might encounter in the woods of the New World. In the 1800s, scientists known as naturalists collected and recorded new species of flora and fauna, and natural history museums, much classier than their dime museum counterparts, became a serious draw for the curious public. Patrons were shocked at some of the previously unimaginable taxidermy animals collected from different parts of the country, so much so that the museums were accused of creating hoaxes to sell tickets. With the discovery of mammoth and dinosaur bones and fossils in New Jersey in the 1830s, it became clear in the area that there had once been all kinds of fantastical creatures on that very land, and perhaps they were still out there, yet undiscovered in their modern forms. During the legendary time when the Leeds Devil was allegedly born to Mother Leeds, the forest that the beast called home already had a very bad reputation. The Pine Barrens are a massive swath of inhospitable land covered in thick forests of pine trees, and during the 1700s were home to the Society's rejects, who became known pejoratively as Pineys. These rural folks were made up of impoverished white people, escaped enslaved people, poachers, moonshiners, and outlaws. The very first mention on record of the Leeds Devil was from an article about the culture of the Pineys by W.F. Mayer that ran in the Atlantic Monthly in May of 1859. The journalist called the Pine Barrens aboriginal in its savagery. One passage cruelly describes a woman he met in the Pine Barrens, who spoke in a guttural voice and lived with her nephew in a crude tent erected deep in the woods. They told the writer about their fear of a monster they called the Leeds Devil, but refused to say more. After asking his local guide about the creature, he was told the same story, the one we've heard today, about the devilish Mother Leeds and her monstrous devil child. Only a handful of years after the 1909 Jersey Devil frenzy, two different pro-eugenics reports presented the people of the Pine Barrens as dangerous, defective, and genetically inferior. A dubious psychologist named H.H. Goddard published his theory that the Pine Barrens were filled with, quote, feeble-headed morons, and claimed that they were essentially a different species altogether, quote, a vigorous animal organism of low intellect but strong physique, the wild man of today. For decades and decades, the residents of the Pine Barrens used the tale of the Leeds Devil to try to scare away cops, gentrifiers, and others like say eugenicists who might disturb their way of life. To those who despised the Pineys, the winged monster was a perfect companion to the violent riffraff that made the Pine Barrens a place of fairy tale-like evil. And in order to keep their children out of this lawless dark, parents warned them of a boogeyman who inhabited the forests. As is often the case with folklore, the tales that we know have many different historical elements that can, under the right circumstances, weave together to form a cohesive legend. The Jersey Devil's origin story may well be a combination of the so-called monstrous births of two politically active evil women, as well as a bitchy political feud between the Leeds family, the Quaker elites, and the famous Benjamin Franklin, all of whom accused them of being in league with the devil. These scandals were metabolized by those who lived in the area, including the residents of the Pine Barrens, who imagined a monster they came to fear, and one that became useful at keeping people out of their woods. It also became handy for nervous local parents who had no desire to let their kids anywhere near the Pine Barrens and needed a good story to scare them away. Soon, the Leeds Devil was the local boogeyman that every community seems to manifest, and the loose pieces of the tale would allow the 9th and Arch Street Dime Museum to collude with local papers and pull off an elaborate hoax, cementing the enduring story, image, and fame of the Jersey Devil. To me, the most interesting part of the Jersey Devil history is that it demonstrates how a handful of accusations made by rival political groups hundreds of years in the past can solidify into a bona fide legend. The too powerful, mouthy woman who dares step out of her role as a mother is cursed with monstrous offspring. The mystical religious radical who challenges official authority becomes a harbinger of Satan. The impoverished forest dwellers, pushed out by society, are said to harbor a mythical bloodthirsty beast not unlike themselves. It makes me wonder, with all the sensational accusations spat out venomously in politics today, what future folklore could we currently be creating? Is it possible that the constant fictional tales told by powerful people about evil, monstrous minorities and satanic political religious enemies are not just the sensationalized headlines of our unending media circus and all-caps social media tirades, but rather the folklore of a distant tomorrow? Fast forward another 400 years, what myths will have been born out of the misunderstood, beastly imagery used during political feuds, out of the frightening creatures of our viral conspiracy theories? What monstrosities will be born out of those who challenge the powerful, who are always condemned as evil, as monsters, and of course, as devils? This was American Hysteria. If you have an urban legend you'd like for us to investigate, head to AmericanHysteria.com and leave us a message on the Urban Legends Hotline. We'd love to hear from you. If you want to support our show, make sure we can continue making it and get ad-free episodes and bonus content, you can head to patreon.com/American Hysteria or subscribe on Apple Plus. You'll get access to Hysteria Home Companion, the other podcast that I do with our producer Miranda, where we tell you stories related to the topics that we're covering and stories we just know that you'll love. That's patreon.com/American Hysteria or subscribe on Apple Plus. American Hysteria is written, produced, and hosted by me, Chelsey Weber-Smith. Our producer and editor is Miranda Zickler. Our sound designer and associate producer is Riley Swedelius Smith, and our voice actor is Will Rogers. Thanks, as always, for listening, and may any monsters that our words create deliver swift justice to those who seek to harm us. Have a great week.